Welcome to the Daily Bite. I'm your host, Reverend Steve Andrews. Today we jump in with Numbers chapter 8. Now Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Aaron and say to him, when you set up the lamps, the 7 lamps shall give light in front of the lampstand." And Aaron did so. He set up its lamps in front of the lampstand as Yahweh commanded Moses. And this was the workmanship of the lampstand: hammered work of gold. From its base to its flowers it was hammered work, according to the pattern that Yahweh had shown Moses, so he made the lampstand. And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, "Take the Levites from among the people of Israel, and cleanse them. Thus you shall do to them to cleanse them. Sprinkle the water of purification upon them, and let them go with a razor over all their body, and wash their clothes, and cleanse themselves. Then let them take a bowl from the herd, and its grain offering of fine flour mixed with oil, and you shall take another bowl from the herd for a sin offering. And you shall bring the Levites before the tent of meeting, and assemble the whole congregation of the people of Israel. When you bring the Levites before Yahweh, the people of Israel shall lay their hands on the Levites, and Aaron shall offer the Levites before Yahweh as a wave offering from the people of Israel, that they may do the service of Yahweh. Then the Levites shall lay their hands on the heads of the bulls, and you shall offer the one for a sin offering, and the other for a burnt offering to Yahweh to make atonement for the Levites. And you shall set the Levites before Aaron and his sons, and shall offer them as a wave offering to Yahweh. Thus you shall separate the Levites from among the people of Israel, and the Levites shall be mine. And after that the Levites shall go in to serve at the tent of meeting, when you have cleansed them and offered them as a wave offering. For they are wholly given to me from among the people of Israel. Instead of all who open the womb, the firstborn of all the people of Israel, I have taken them for myself. For all the firstborn among the people of Israel are mine, both of man and of beast. On the day that I struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I consecrated them for myself. And I have taken the Levites instead of all the firstborn among the people of Israel, and I have given the Levites as a gift to Aaron and his sons from among the people of Israel, to do the service for the people of Israel at the tent of meeting, and to make atonement for the people of Israel, that there may be no plague among the people of Israel when the people of Israel come near the sanctuary." Thus did Moses and Aaron and all the congregation of the people of Israel to the Levites. According to all that Yahweh commanded Moses concerning the Levites, the people of Israel did to them. And the Levites purified themselves from sin, and washed their clothes, and Aaron offered them as a wave offering before Yahweh, and Aaron made atonement for them to cleanse them. And after that the Levites went in to do their service in the tent of meeting before Aaron and his sons, as Yahweh had commanded Moses concerning the Levites, so they did to them. And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, "This applies to the Levites. From 25 years old and upward they shall come to do duty in the service of the tent of meeting. And from the age of 50 years they shall withdraw from the duty of the service, and serve no more. They minister to their brothers in the tent of meeting by keeping guard, but they shall do no service. Thus you shall do to the Levites in assigning their duties." This is the word of the Lord. So the chapter starts out with a reference back to Exodus and the construction of the lampstand that would give light to the inside of the tabernacle tent itself. And so the referent here, for example, verse 4, saying the pattern that Yahweh showed to Moses, that's Exodus 25, verses 31 to 40. And then, so he made the lampstand, that's Exodus 37, verses 17 to 24. As you have in Exodus several chapters of blueprint, as God lays out the framework of the tabernacle for them, how it should be built. And then another set of chapters right at the end of the book that discuss how they actually build it. Bezalel and Oholiab being the two chief master craftsmen working on that task. The next section, which is the bulk of the chapter here for us today, deals with cleansing the Levites so that they can begin serving the Lord and caring for the tabernacle, beginning to prepare for setting out camp and getting ready for I guess at this point, the 39 remaining years of their exodus, their wilderness wanderings, before they enter into the promised land. So, the first thing to cleanse them, sprinkle them with water. That's a spot where you can pause and ask your children the question, where in our churches today do we see people sprinkled with water? And see if you can make the connection here to baptism, as this is the way that, and in our Lutheran churches, typically we do baptisms. It doesn't have to be done that way, but just pouring water on the head of a child or an adult 3 times in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit is the normal practice of baptism in a Lutheran congregation. And so you can talk about that, the gift that baptism is, as it cleanses us, as God is washing us clean of our sin, and he's also pouring out his Holy Spirit into us, calling us his own children. So wonderful blessing that baptism is, and a lot of connection here, the cleansing and also being set apart as holy to the Lord, as the Levites are being set apart here as well. You see the offerings again. So you got a bull, the grain offering, sin offering. Even the Levites themselves are a wave offering. Now, this is worth stopping for a moment and just discussing. I think oftentimes when we hear Old Testament sacrifices, we think of consumption. If it's an animal, it's slaughtered and it's burned, and that's true in many ways. Different parts are used for different things. The blood is taken and it's used in different ways. Leviticus first 7 or 8 chapters really covers that pretty well. But there are other kinds of offering, and even at that with the animals, some of the animal parts are kept aside for the priests to eat and for their families as a grain offering is brought in. Some of it's burned, some of it's not. You've got all this going on. And so here the Levites, when we read that they are being offered to Yahweh as a wave offering, it does not mean that the Levites are being sacrificed. They're not being killed. They are, however, being offered up to the Lord for his service. So they are being set apart. They're being marked as holy to God and to his tabernacle to care for. The people of Israel lay their hands on them, and then the Levites themselves actually are going to lay their hands on the bulls being offered. So some laying on of hands, that's another practice in the church. You could talk about perhaps where you see that. That one's a lot less common in Lutheran churches. Typically, the laying on of hands only happens when we ordain a pastor. There's a bit of a connection here, a bit. Pastors are not really Levites. The Levites' task is to care for the house of God. Your pastor does a little bit of that, but your pastor's role is not one and the same as the Levites. And in fact, there's really only a small amount of overlap. If your pastor sees something at the church that needs to be cared for, he'll take care of it. Something small. Typically, the members of the church handle a lot of the care of the congregation, the building itself, while the pastor cares for the people. So there's difference there, but noteworthy, the laying on of hands. That's about the only connection we have to our churches today. They are separated. This verses 14 and onward there, the idea that they are replacement of the firstborn. We had that conversation back in chapter 3, starting at verse 40. So God had rescued Israel by the plague of the firstborn, where he destroyed the firstborn in every household in Egypt as a judgment upon Pharaoh and Egypt and their sins and their false god worship. And in doing so, God had the Passover for the Israelites, where they painted their doors with the blood of the Lamb, and they were redeemed. They were passed over by that. God did not destroy their firstborn. And so after that, in chapter 13, God declared, Exodus chapter 13, God declared Israel to be his firstborn, and that all of their firstborn, whether it's an animal or a person, has to be dedicated to him. The animals would be offered as sacrifices. The children would have to be bought back. You had to redeem the child. And so the Levites, as we saw in chapter 3, take the place of that. They are the firstborn. They're the ones dedicated to serve the Lord, which we then see in verse 19. I have given the Levites as a gift to Aaron and his sons. Aaron and his sons are the priests. They're the ones that handle the sacrifices. The Levites are to assist them in their work and to care for the tabernacle, make sure everything is properly tended to. So you see that relationship between them. Verse 20, that whole paragraph really, again, we saw this the last couple of days, but the faithfulness of the people of Israel is here at the start of the book of Numbers. We've seen it several times. It shows up again and again. Thus Moses and Aaron did. So they did to them, as it talks about the Levites down in verse 22. They do what they've been asked to do, which is good. They're not always going to. We're going to see that as we move forward in the book. But for now, this is good. And lastly, today we get the retirement of the Levites. They're not to work forever. 25 years old until 50. At 50, they retire. And so there's a few things we can pick out of this. First, you can talk to your children about what retirement is. Especially small children probably don't know. So this could be a good conversation. Why do we retire? Maybe this is a great opportunity for your children who are a little bit older to talk to grandma or grandpa or great-grandma, great-grandpa about retirement. Why did they choose to retire? Why did they retire when they did? What has retirement been like? Just getting them talking about these kinds of things, intergenerational, can be beneficial. Intergenerational things are always beneficial for our families and helpful. So that could be a good one. And ultimately, you get to the idea that whether you're working in a job or not, we are still called to serve the Lord. And we see that here with these Levites. They are, yes, they retire, but they're not done. It's not like they're out. When you look at verse 25, that they retire, they withdraw from the duty of service and serve no more. But verse 26, they minister to their brothers in the tent of meeting by keeping guard. So the Levites have their tasks, which we've seen in the previous chapters discussed, that they are to guard, watch, observe, keep the things of the tabernacle. And these retired ones, the older men, they're going to stop doing some of the heavier work, the carrying of the tabernacle, for example, when they move from one place to another. Maybe even the physical labor of preparing for the sacrifices or the mending of things, whatever. They instead are just going to keep guard. They're going to keep watch. So there's still a role for them to play. Keep watch of what? Keep guard of what, perhaps you might ask? Likely a reference here to what we've seen, and we added in this chapter up in verse 19, when the people of Israel come near the sanctuary. They're almost like a doorkeeper at that point, or a watchman, as you think of a watchman throughout history, keeping guard over a city and letting them know when someone was approaching, be they friend or foe. So they can have that kind of a role still as they take rest from their heavier labors. Now, as a pastor myself, I've made a joke in some way and related to this, because I began service when I was 25. I have a birthday in May, and before I turned 26 that year, when I began my pastoral service in the pastoral office, call day, where I learned where I would serve, my first congregation, happened on May 1st. I graduated and received my, I guess, certification to serve as a pastor in the church body on May 17th. So all of that happening prior to my 26th birthday. So I guess you could say I didn't get ordained until June, but started at 25. So I jokingly say sometimes that I should retire when I hit 50. But we'll see. There's a long way to go before that. If the Lord wants me to serve him, I'll serve him, whether I'm in a church serving as a pastor or if I'm somewhere else. Retiring doesn't mean you're out of the game. It's not like professional athletes where they retire from, a sport and then you never Many of them you never hear from again. I mean, it's really the joke about Lutheran pastors is we never retire. Even when a pastor does retire, you still see him. He still does stuff. He still preaches and teaches in various places and helps out how he can. And that's true of us as we talk about retirement in general. As long as you're in this world, the Lord has something here for you to do. You are still called to serve. You may have retired. If you have, congratulations. You have earned some rest from your labors, but don't hang it up. Don't give in to thinking that life is now just about you resting and doing whatever you want. You are still a Christian. You are still called to love the Lord your God and to love your neighbor as yourself. So find ways to serve those around you. You probably already have, but in case you hadn't, have some conversations about that. Maybe your grandchildren, to flip this around from the start, maybe your grandchildren can encourage you and give you some ways to serve that you haven't noticed before. The Lord be with you.